started here. I see a few more people are logging in, but we'll get started just for those of you who showed up on time. I'd like to welcome you to our Top Tech Trends webinar. My name is Don Cockane. I'm the owner and president here at Applied Integration, and I want to just take a second to thank you for your time today. I know you're busy, and we appreciate you taking a few minutes out of your day to jump in here and give us a listen. Just a real brief introduction to myself. I'm the owner and president here at Applied Integration. I've spent the last 25 plus years working in the IT field, delivering IT services to businesses around the country, and we started Applied Integration back in 2006, so we've been here for about 11 years now. So we've got a lot of stuff we want to cover today, so I'm going to jump right in and try to move along fairly quickly, because all we're really kind of trying to do is give you a top-level kind of overview of the things we want to talk about here. And one of the first ones I want to do to begin with is just give you an idea of what we're going to touch on today. And I'll jump right in with security trends. So I just wanted to kind of I'm going to talk briefly about what's going on out there in the security world and what you as a business owner needs to know about the current state of the world in terms of viruses and ransomware. Everybody's heard a lot about that. We'll talk a little bit about it, and I'll help you understand what's going on and what you can do to protect your business from this. We're going to talk a little bit about disaster planning and business continuity planning and what you can do to protect your business from when things go bad in it. And there's actually a lot you can do these days. Cloud computing is also something that's been on a lot of people's minds lately. We hear a lot about it out there in the world. So we're going to touch on cloud computing a little bit, and I'll give you kind of an explanation of what it is and how it could relate to your business. Mobility is another big thing that's changing the way we do business today. Our employees are starting to work more and more outside of the office. So we'll touch on mobility a little bit and give you some things to think about there. And then we'll just quickly talk a little bit about social media and what's going on, and again, how it relates to your business. And then I'm going to kind of wrap up with just some basic budget considerations, kind of give you some guidelines on what you should be thinking about in terms of budgeting for IT work. So let's jump right in. Let's talk about security a little bit. I just want to kind of tell you what I've learned as I've been taking care of small and medium-sized businesses for all these years, is a lot of businesses are kind of operating in a sense of denial or state of denial, that they kind of feel like they're too small to be a target for the bad guys out there. And I just want to dispel that notion. I want you to not kid yourself. There's no business these days that is too small to be a target for cyber attacks. In fact, a recent statistic we found was that showed that 43% of cyber attacks were targeting small businesses. Also, I often hear people say, you know what, we don't really need to worry about security too much because we don't store any valuable information. And that's just flat not true. In almost all small businesses now, there's something out there that has some value to the bad guys. For instance, 68% of small, medium-sized businesses store their customers' or their vendors' email addresses and phone numbers and billing addresses. And while at first glance that information might not seem really relevant to you or might not seem like it has a high value, when you put that in the hands of somebody who's trying to cause some trouble, it has a really high value, because it gives them either an easy way to act legitimate as they're trying to get into another business, or to begin the process of stealing identities and so forth. So it's important stuff, and it needs to be protected. And what we've also found is a kind of an alarming statistic that 65% roughly of small and medium-sized businesses don't have a password policy, or if they have one, they don't enforce it. And but what a password policy is a policy where you are in control of and are actively taking care of passwords, not only as people log into desktops, but in terms of other equipment around the network. A lot of times we find that people will take a new piece of equipment, take it out of the box, plug it in, turn it on, and just start using it without changing any of the default passwords that the vendor puts in the equipment. And so what happens is you've got equipment on the network or connected to your internet connection that has a default password in it, and it's very trivial for a bad guy to find those default passwords, and that's the first thing that they typically try when they're trying to gain access to your machines or your network, is all of the basic default passwords. So there's a few things you can see that even though you may have a very small business, you've got to really think about security in terms of what's going on, and just don't kid yourself. Every business is a target these days, and every business has something that somebody can benefit from or have some value to the bad guys that are trying to get in out there. So what's really going on with viruses and ransomware? Well, I can tell you right now that ransomware and the pace with which ransomware is exploding into the world out there is quickly surpassed everything that was going on with viruses in general over the last few years. Viruses were, different levels of malicious. Sometimes they garbaged up machines. Sometimes they gave control of your machines to other people. But ransomware has really been the one thing that's turned out to be the most lucrative for the bad guys out there. And a recent study for the 2016 showed that of all the bad stuff that was being sent out there across the world, 60% of it now, of the payloads of the malicious software that was being transmitted around through emails and drive-by downloads off websites and so forth, was ransomware. So you can see by that graphic I threw up there on the screen that the number and the incidence of ransomware being distributed is exploding, and it's only going to keep getting worse. Every day, the bad guys are out there taking basically the initial ransomware things that were successful, such as CryptoLocker and so forth, and they're making new variations of that really quickly so that they can get them through the antivirus software without them being recognized. A study we looked at a little bit ago said that in 2016, in Q1, on average, a business was attacked by ransomware only every 2 minutes. So if you take every business out there, every 2 minutes, somebody was getting that ransomware attack. By the third quarter of that same year, that timing had gone down to every 40 seconds. So you can see it more than doubled in just 2 quarters. So it's really starting to explode, and it's something you need to be paying attention to. We've also discovered now that out there in the black market, there is this thing known as ransomware as a service now, where there are legitimately bad guys out there selling or renting ransomware services to other bad guys, so that the other bad guys don't have to know anything to be able to distribute ransomware and hold your files hostage. So just in case you don't know what ransomware is, and it's been all over the news, I would expect you probably do, but what happens with ransomware is when this stuff gets on your computer, it encrypts your data files. So it makes them so that you cannot open them, and it works its way down through all your data files on your computer, and when it's done, then and only then does it make itself known that it's doing anything on your machine. And it pops up a message and says your data has all been encrypted. And if you want it back, if you want to gain access to that equipment, you have to pay a ransom through anonymous bitcoins to whoever encrypted your stuff. And that the amount of money that they charge can vary wildly. Sometimes it's as little as $500, sometimes it's $2,000 or $3,000, and they give you a short amount of time to pay the ransom, and the amount of money that they want goes up over time. So if you pay them right away, it's one amount. If you wait 24 hours, the amount goes up, and after a certain period of time, most of them say, well, too bad, you're never getting your data back. So this has really taken off, and it's doing a lot of damage out there to networks. The only thing you can really do is get your business protected as possible, and that takes a layered approach to security here. There's all kinds of bad stuff going on in the world, and I just like to tell people right out of the gate, there's no silver bullets. There's no one thing that you do that protects your business completely. There's several different layers of things that need to be installed, and what we need to do is kind of start at the internet connection into your business with a solid firewall. That firewall needs to be kept current. The services need to be on it, need to be kept current. And let me just tell you right now, what the phone company hooked up on the end of your internet connection when they put it in, or the cable company, is not a firewall. So they put their router or their modem in place to get you connected, but they're basically providing no security services as far as that piece of equipment goes. So a lot of people kind of assume that there is a firewall on their connection just because there's a little black box there that the phone company put in, but I just need you to understand that is not a firewall. It's not really doing anything to keep you secure from malicious software and bad guys trying to get in and work on your network. If you have a firewall in place, you're not done yet. You have to go around to every single machine on your network and make sure that you've got some strong professional grade antivirus software installed, and Same thing applies to this. It needs to be kept current, which means you need to pay for the ongoing update services for that software, because if it's not being updated, the software has no way to recognize new and changing viruses that are coming out every day, and stuff will get through there. So budget for good software and keep some money in the budget to keep it current, because that's really important. And a lot of times people ask us how important it is to patch the operating systems on your machines. It's really important. Just recently, in fact, this week, Microsoft released a huge security update that closed a bunch of holes that were made public when the NSA and CIA were hacked by hackers, and a bunch of that information of some exploits and open security holes was released to the world out there. So it's really important. Again, this is a layered approach. So you're trying to make sure that your internet connection is protected, that you've got antivirus software, and that it's good stuff and it's updated. And then as the operating system vendors identify those security openings that still exist in their operating systems, they're distributing the patches. You just need to make sure that those patches are being installed on your machines in a timely manner. And it does take also a team approach, and I'm talking about your team, to help you stay out of trouble. And the first place you can start with that is to basically educate the people who work with you, who work for your business. One of the things that I find is really important but is often overlooked in small and medium-sized businesses is having an acceptable use internet policy in place and keeping it updated. It's important for you to make sure that your employees understand that you're providing internet connectivity for them for work-related activities, and that they are not to use that for surfing their fantasy football league stuff and going around to all the kind of personal sites that they should be doing after hours at home on their own connection. They should be using the internet connections that you provide for work-related stuff, and by doing that, you kind of minimize the amount of extra traffic that they might be going to, where they have the chance of downloading malicious software from a insecure site or a site that's been compromised out there that's kind of not a business site. And you can also teach your people how to stay out of trouble by talking to them about how to not click every link in an email, identify emails that are potentially going to cause some problems. And we find that a little bit of education here goes a long way. Recently, well, we kind of keep track of these kinds of emails on a large scale, but here's an example of an email that we found in somebody's inbox that when you first glance at this email, if you're a user who's busy and you're working through your day and you're just looking at what's dropping into your inbox, it looks to me like you could quickly say, wow, I got an email from FedEx here and the tracking number's there and there's a link to an invoice and I better click on that and see what it is. I don't really know what it is, but it looks legit and I better click that link and see what's going on. But if you can train your people how to just be a little bit skeptical about this kind of stuff, well, obviously it starts with the first question is, were you expecting anything from FedEx? And, you know, just because people are kind of gotten used to FedEx sending emails out, they don't really pay all that close attention. They see FedEx up there in the name and they think it's legitimate. But if you just look at a couple of simple things here, right up there where it shows the email address in the brackets, it says tracking at afedex.com. So you can see right away that this didn't really legitimately come from somebody at FedEx. It came from a domain name that was registered to look like FedEx, but it's a little bit off. So that's kind of your first sign that maybe something's wrong here. Second sign might be to simply hover over that link down there where it says invoice for tracking number 755, whatever. And when you do that, Microsoft Outlook, most of your email clients will pop up a little box and show you where that link is going to take you. This is so that you can see where you're going to go before you click on a link. And as you can see, we did that in this instance. And this link is not going to take us anywhere near a FedEx site. It's going to take us off to some domain name that has nothing to do with FedEx. And then you can also see that that domain name also has the /file.php : d equals blah, 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 all that stuff. What I can tell you by looking at this is if you click that link, you're going to a bogus website and you're going to execute a little PHP script on there. And most likely that landing page that you go to is going to try extremely hard to inject some bad software into your machine. The people who are doing this are hoping that you don't have good antivirus software in place, you don't have a firewall, and you're not patching your computer, they're probably going to try any number of those exploits, if not all of them. They're going to try several different ways to get into your machine and dump some bad stuff on your machine, and you may wind up being infected with ransomware. You may get a virus. Who knows what's going to happen. But I can promise you this: it's not going to be good. So a little bit of education goes a long way with helping your people get involved in helping keep your systems secure from the bad guys out there. So no matter what we do to train people and all that kind of stuff, we still have to sit down as business owners and really kind of have a realistic look at what constitutes a disaster with us. We have to kind of assess our own risks inside of each of our businesses and figure out, well, where are we at risk when it comes to disaster recovery planning? And a couple of things that I feel like are important components of that risk assessment are things that are sometimes overlooked by the typical business owner. A lot of people, when we ask them, well, do you have a disaster recovery plan? They say, yeah, if the building burns down, we know what we're going to do. Or if there's a flood, we know what we're going to do. Or when there's a hurricane warning and we have to evacuate the building, we know what steps we're going to take. But if we start to dig down in a little bit further into stuff that's much more common than those big disasters, and we get down to little disasters, a lot of times that's where we find that folks are missing some things. So I think it's important, as you're doing a risk assessment on your business, that you think about hardware crashes. Hardware is just hardware, and it is going to fail at some point in its lifetime, and most likely it's going to do it at an inopportune moment. So that's not the time to start thinking about it. You need to think a little bit about, well, what happens if something in our network dies? Who's going to get it fixed? How quickly can they get it fixed, and so forth. So just want you to pay some attention to that before it happens. And another component of a good risk assessment is, well, let's talk for a second about just a human error thing. Somebody deletes a critical file. What do you do to get that file back? How fast do you recover it? It's not a full-blown disaster, but it might be a full-blown disaster. If this is your big management budget spreadsheet that you've been working on for the last month in preparation for a board meeting, and somebody accidentally deletes it or overwrites it 10 minutes before the meeting's supposed to start, that might be counted as a disaster in somebody's eyes. So it's the kind of thing that you need to think about a little bit and include in the risks to your business as you're thinking about disasters or things that can go wrong. Another thing that we find people often ignore is the update process for line of business software or other software around the building. Once in a while, we know software all has to be updated periodically, but every so often something can go wrong with the software update and make that software unusable. And it's just important to start thinking about that a little bit in terms of, well, what would happen if we suddenly couldn't use our line of business software? Do we have a way to roll back those changes or go back, in essence, kind of turn the clock back to a point in time before that happened to get us back to work? And again, in risk assessment, I think it's really important to consider that process of a virus getting in and getting to your sensitive systems, in your network there, and asking that question is, should a virus get in, or should ransomware get in? Can we eliminate it, or could we turn the clock back and get our systems back to a point in time before that happened? So I don't have all the answers to all this stuff, but again, what I'm asking you to do is, you're thinking about the things that can go wrong in your business, is to include these things in your own disaster recovery assessment. It's important to prepare for the worst, but there's good news on the horizon out there. Backup technology is kind of one of the big solutions for a lot of those things that can go wrong. And backup technology has improved by leaps and bounds over the past few years. It's not all that long ago that we were all still backing up all of our systems to tape-based backup systems and hoping that the tapes didn't deteriorate, hoping that the tape drive would work when we needed to get the data back, carrying the tapes off site so that they didn't melt if there was a fire, things like that. But due to the changes that have happened, now most backup technology that's most effective is being backed up to disks that are on the network. And that gives us a faster methodology for backing up, and it oftentimes gives us a higher capacity as well. So just as you're thinking about this, things that can go wrong in your business, think about your backup and make sure that you've got your business on, some good technology that's fast and has enough capacity to get everything covered there. I mentioned carrying the tapes off-site. We all probably who've been in the IT business have done that for years, where we knew that if a fire or flood happened, that physical medium of the tape had to be outside of the building when that happened, or all our backups were gone. Nowadays, the solution to getting data off-site is to store it directly to another set of hard drives in the cloud or across the internet out in some storage facility that is not inside your building. So this is really a good way to do it. It's pretty much automatic, so you don't have to worry about thinking about it as your systems are backing up to the local hard drives. That information can then be turned around and pushed off-site, off into the cloud. But again, as we look at this, one of the things that you need to understand is your internet connection becomes a real integral part of this. You must have an internet connection that's got the bandwidth available to push the amount of information you need off-site. So, there's a couple of components that factor into this that maybe didn't in the old days when we were hand carrying our data off-site. And one last thing I want to talk about just briefly about backups is please don't think that all of your data is in one place anymore. Valuable data lives everywhere on your network, and it's important to look around and make sure you're getting all of it built into your backup plan as you do it. You might have your line of business system may be backed up, your main point of sale server or something like that may be getting backed up nice and neat, and everything's fine for the bulk of the people that are using that. But don't forget about your accountant's PC with that great big budget spreadsheet sitting on it, or your marketing person with all of their documents they've created and things like that. There's valuable data that would cost you a lot of money and time, mostly time, to recover it or to recreate it. So look around the entire network as you're building a backup strategy and make sure you're not missing that data that's starting to grow in other places besides where you might see as your first look goes. So in the other side of the coin of disaster preparedness is what we call business continuity, or keeping the business running. And there's several things you can do to think in terms of business continuity or keeping the business running when things go south. One of the easiest things to consider, and is probably the first place we always ought to look, is at the power. We know that all this stuff's got to run off power out of the wall, and these days that's normally not an issue, but there's still some steps you can take to put some equipment in place to keep things nice and neat. For instance, battery backups on your PCs there. We know in most places, if you're in a good environment, your power is on all day, every day, 7 days a week, and you never give it a thought. But every now and then a storm passes through, or somebody crashes into a power pole down the street, and you may get a very short-term outage or even just a blip of the power. And if you're in the middle of a great big spreadsheet, when that happens and your computer shuts off unexpectedly, that causes you all kinds of trouble. But a little inexpensive battery backup in front of that machine, between the machine and the wall, will keep you up and running through those little short-term outages so you don't have any problem. We've also found that in some situations, depending on your location of your business and how the power company is in your area, some businesses find it is necessary and relevant to actually put generators outside of the building to generate their own power on site during a longer term outage. That's the kind of thing that, again, you kind of need to take your own environment under consideration. But most of the time when I'm talking to people about power, they know, yeah, our power goes up and down all the time, or you know what, we haven't had a power outage in years. So, they know kind of what the history has been for, and whether or not they need to worry about generating their own power. So business continuity planning can also get you to the point where we can actually start to look at not only is the power up and running all the time, but do we have a way to virtualize the important machines inside of your network? The good news is, again, based on a lot of the changes that's going on with backup technology and virtualization of machines, nowadays it's pretty trivial for us, if we've done some planning up front, to bring a machine back from a hardware failure by virtualizing it locally from a backup appliance, which just basically means we take a copy of your machine that crashed, we start it up in a virtual environment, and let the person who is using that machine still use that virtual copy of it while the physical machine gets built back up or repaired, as whatever the case may be. And if we've planned things out properly, we can actually take the entire business and bring it back up out of the cloud out there if your entire building is impacted. Let's say that a flood has happened and your building's going to be out of commission for 2 weeks while that gets cleaned up and sorted out. It is possible, if we've done the proper planning before time, to bring your entire business back out of cloud-based resources through virtualization. So yeah, just something to be aware of, and for your business environment what kind of risks you have, but just know that if you are in an environment where odds are that you may get flooded out from time to time, or hurricanes or tornadoes are active in your area, it might be wise to take a page out of this book and say, well, let's take the business continuity plan and make it such that no matter what happens to the physical building, we can still transact business. So I said I'd talk a little bit about cloud computing. I'm not going to spend too much time here because this is just kind of a big concept, but I just basically kind of want to make you understand what the heck is going on with cloud computing anyway. And cloud computing really, for all intents and purposes, is nothing more complicated than just simply using some computers for access to software that's outside of your building that you're accessing across the internet. So it's still a computer running somewhere. It's still, running software, running operating systems, but you're accessing it remotely across the internet. A real common example of that is Microsoft's Office 365 offering. Hosted Exchange email and the Office tools can all be gathered up from Microsoft through the internet without having to put an old expensive mail server inside of your building anymore. So that's the type of thing that's being used a lot. A lot of ERP systems these days are moving into the hosted environment where the actual ERP software company will build up a big data center collected with a whole bunch of servers in it, and they'll manage the software for you, and you'll access it remotely out of their data center, and they call those hosted systems, basically. A real common software package you've probably heard of or looked at or touched, or you may even be using right now, is QuickBooks, and QuickBooks has a totally online version of their software that you access just through a browser. Same with Salesforce, a real common, prevalent CRM, customer management tool out there, and it's never been anything other than a cloud-based application. So these are real common applications, and they're just out there. They're starting to be used more and more remotely, and it's making sense for a lot of businesses. So why should you care about this? Well, if you've got a bunch of equipment in your building, moving to some of these cloud-based systems may save you legitimate money every month in services and headaches and keeping people in your business to keep your stuff up and running. You're not going to have any more servers in the back closet that you have to buy and have somebody come in and install and pay a bunch of money for maintenance on and keep a hardware contract in place in case it breaks and worry about the power and the cooling and all that kind of stuff. All that stuff can be taken out of the picture and put back on to the people who are hosting your services. It's their responsibility to make sure everything's cool and up and running and all that kind of thing. So you get out of the business of buying servers and big equipment like that. And because all of this stuff is remote and it's being accessed oftentimes just through a browser, the actual workstation equipment that you put on people's desks becomes much less of a factor. It doesn't need to be as powerful as it maybe needed to be in the past. It becomes nearly disposable, where you can have a very inexpensive thin client workstation or small, very small little PC running there. And if that machine physically dies, you, for all intents and purposes, can more or less just throw the thing away and put a new one in its place and be right back in business. And kind of the last thing that you should care about a little bit about cloud computing is you can access it from anywhere you can get on the internet. So if you're traveling, if your people are traveling, if you have an internet connection, you can get to those resources. You don't have to worry about going down into the office to log into your servers there. So is cloud computing right for your business, and how do you get started with it? Well, that's a question that we do need to talk about in individual basis, because there's no one answer that fits everybody. But if there is one answer that's pretty common, I would say that your email services for your business, that's a no-brainer. It's very easy to put folks on Microsoft's hosted Exchange and give them an extremely robust, very full-featured email product without having to put an Exchange server in the building. And that one's a no-brainer. It's inexpensive, it's quick and simple, and works great. And yeah, that one I can recommend to everybody. But if you want to talk about, say, your ERP system or your line of business system, well, that takes a bit more looking. There's a few things that we need to take into consideration as we look at that. And so we need to have a bit more of a discussion. It's probably okay to go that route. But again, as I'm talking about doing that, I'm going to have a pretty, mission critical discussion about your internet connection. We need to know, what is it? How fast is it? Not only how fast is the download speed, but how fast is your upload speed, because that becomes more of a factor. Are you in an area where that connection is always on, or do you have a lot of outages? Those things become much more important as you start to talk about taking your business and running your important systems out in the cloud. Your connection needs to be fast, it needs to be stable. We also are finding, as we're doing this, more and more times we're putting redundant connections in as well. What we find is we can typically put in one wired connection and then one perhaps wireless connection, so that if somebody's trenching out in the street in front of your business and they cut through the cable and cut your internet connection, we can have the communications gear set up to fail over immediately to your backup connection, and we can get you connected over, say, the cellular network or that kind of thing. Might not be quite as fast as your main connection, but it gives you a way to keep running, keep using your cloud-based systems while your main connection gets fixed out there. So cloud computing might be something that should be on the radar for you, but there are, we do have a few things that we really need to discuss if you really want to start thinking about that. Mobilizing your people, mobility, is something that we find is part of the conversation more and more every day. We're finding that more and more people are sending their employees out to do the work in front of the customer, going to job sites, going to customer locations, vendor managing their inventory, doing things like that, where your people are traveling out to the places where the work is getting done, but they need full access to your systems while they're doing that. So it's not a big deal anymore to mobilize your workforce, but there are some things that, again, need to be factored into the conversation as you start to think about your people becoming more and more mobile. And one of the common things that we start with is the hardware considerations. There's a couple of them. One of the most answers that we ask right off the bat is, who's going to actually own and buy the equipment? Are you going to ask your employees to bring their own device, or are you going to buy the devices and give them to your employees to use? If your employee does own the device, they bring their own device, we just need to talk about what happens if that employee leaves the business, if they get fired or if they quit. Is there data on that equipment that is your proprietary information that we need to make sure gets wiped off of it, or things like that? So that's one of the considerations that we have. Is, the first blush, a lot of people say, well, gosh, if I can get the employee to buy their own laptop or their own tablet, that's great, because it saves me the cost of it. But just understand that if they walk out the door and it's their equipment, we just got to make sure we know what's going to happen to any data that was on it. And what do we do if something gets lost or stolen or broken or dropped in the lake? Again, we need to think about this stuff before we head down the road, and you've got a whole bunch of workstations out there or laptops, everybody's traveling to one, and then somebody calls you and says, gosh, I left my laptop in Starbucks and now I'm 300 miles down the road. What do I do? That's not the time to start planning for what we're going to do about this. So these are just some of the things we need to talk about as far as the hardware goes. But I can tell you that there are good solutions for all these questions, and but there's not one solution that fits every business. There are also some security considerations that we need to take into consideration as we start doing this. The most common of which is, we just need to make sure that because they're going to be coming back into your business, in most cases through your firewall, that we have a proper firewall there and it's configured and we're getting people in a secure fashion, so that we have control over when they get access, and that we know we can turn the access off again if they leave the business or something goes wrong. And then as we do this, it's also important to kind of think about the jobs and identify those that can go remote and those that can't. And understanding the difference between a traveling employee, a person who's living out of their car these days and they're traveling around with a laptop and are working at the job sites, that's a little bit different kind of considerations than somebody who just says, hey, I'd like to work from home 3 days a week and telecommute. So you kind of need to think about it and figure out, you may have different requirements for each of those scenarios that people are asking for. But one thing I can tell you is, if you haven't had the conversation with your folks, trust me, you will at some point in time in the near future. We looked at a study that showed that the estimate right now is that the mobile workforce this year will surpass 1.3 billion people. That's 1.3 billion with a B, people working remotely and accessing computer systems, work systems, off phones and tablets and laptops. So if it's not in your business right now, if it's not a factor for you, it will be soon. Your people will start asking for it, or your customers and vendors might start asking for that service of having your people come to them more often. Social media, I just want to touch on this a little bit. I think most people have had a tendency in the small and medium-sized business world to kind of stick their head in the sand a little bit about social media and try to ignore it. But I think it's better off to embrace it and control it. I think that's a better way to attack the thing of what's going on with social media. Let me just kind of tell you some basic consumer assumptions out there. Your consumers, your customers, they are starting to assume that you are where they are, that you have a presence on the services and sites that they want to use. They do assume you have a website, and you should have a website, but your customers assume you do. Most customers, because they're spending so much time on Facebook these days, they assume you have a Facebook presence, and they might want to follow you there and interact with you through that Facebook page. They assume you have a Twitter account. It's not, it's not something that people are saying, well, I wonder if they do. They just assume you do, and they assume they can find you there. And kind of the last consumer assumption, again, this is stuff that consumers are starting to assume, whether you like it or not, is they assume you are going to respond to whichever of these social media layers that they choose to interact with you on. So it's not up to you to decide anymore. It's up to your customers, and you kind of need to have an ear tuned to what they're telling you or where they're trying to talk to you through. Some other important sites you need to be aware of is, one is Google+. Google's really becoming, kind of a dominant service out there as far as social media goes. And Yelp is really big in the business review world. So if you don't know if your business has a Yelp presence, I would suggest you check it out, get involved with it, start to see what's going on there. Pinterest is another one that is growing out there in terms of business interaction. It wasn't always that way, but more and more businesses are finding that it's productive for them to be involved with Pinterest and have a presence there. So as this stuff goes, I would say ignore it at your own peril these days. Again, like I said, having a website is an absolute must, and you must have on there at least your hours of operation and a map to your business so people can find you and find out when they can come do business with you. You should have some way to contact your business on your website, and more often these days, people are expecting you to have maybe some specials and some deals. If you are a consumer-facing business, they're expecting to see some coupon or something like that they can get some benefit by looking at your website. Twitter that one's a tricky one, because that is the most immediate place that a lot of people lash out now when they're having a problem working with your business. They're going to go right to Twitter, and they're going to let the whole world know that they're angry about something that's going on. In fact, a recent study that we looked at showed that 81% of Twitter users are looking for a same-day response if they post a question or a complaint out there to your business. 81%, that's nearly everybody who's using it, assumes that if they find your account there and they complain, you're going to get back to them the same day on that same service. So what we're telling people these days is get involved with this social media stuff, take control of it, and be prepared for when something goes wrong. Put someone in charge of monitoring your Twitter account, but prepare for and teach them how you want them to reply when something goes wrong. Don't just leave it to their best efforts. Put a policy in place and say, look, this is how we reply, because the businesses who have had serious incidences reported on Twitter, or serious complaints on Twitter, that have handled them well have generally benefited by handling them well. Those that stumble and fall all over themselves to handle a complaint well just get it makes matters worse. And there's been some major, like media frenzied things with airlines and all that kind of thing, and I won't go into right now, but you've probably heard about the companies that have done it poorly. So be prepared. Again, think about it ahead of time. What are you going to do when someone's complaining through Twitter? Same thing with Yelp. Yelp is one where people are reviewing your business, and I would say if you're going to control your Yelp presence and be looking at it, be prepared for negativity, because you're going to probably see as much of it as you're going to see positive reviews, and be careful how you respond. Don't make a negative review worse by going out on the attack. Apologize and move on. Control the conversation. That's basically what you're doing with social media, is you're in control of the conversation, or the conversation is controlling you. Now, I will just say that as you start to use social media and get involved with it, there are tools out there to help it make it easier for you to post content, to monitor what's going on and so forth. Jump in, go learn the tools, and make this as easy as you can, because it is going to probably turn into a little bit of a time-consuming thing, but we're not in charge of choosing whether or not we use this stuff. Our customers and our consumers are. And give people a reason to follow you. That's a big thing. I mean, people have found that it has been very good for their businesses to go out there and establish a strong social media presence and increase their follow through from their customers and get more people in the door by giving them specials and deals and so forth that are only available through social media. That always is typically one thing that brings people in the door, is when you send them a deal on your Twitter feed or something like that. And last but not least, I would say solicit feedback all the time, but only if you're prepared to respond to it. Don't ignore what's going on your social media pages, LinkedIn, Facebook, Yelp. Ask for the feedback, but ask for it and genuinely listen to it and act on it, and you'll find it'll benefit your business in the long run. Okay, so the last thing I'm going to wrap up here with is just some quick overviews of what I think people need to pay attention to in terms of budgeting for success. And I have a few steps here that I think business owners need to do. Step one is basically just accept the fact that your equipment that you've bought is going to get old and it's going to wear out. It's not going to last forever. And I've seen people try to make things last forever. Sometimes I see computers out there that I swear came over on the Mayflower. Step two is plan to refresh your hardware. We generally recommend people work a 5-year schedule for hardware these days. Most of the time, if we're selling hardware, we're including 5 years of maintenance on the stuff through the vendor's hardware repair plan. But typically after 5 years, the cost of that maintenance becomes cost prohibitive, or some vendors won't even allow the equipment to be renewed past 5 years. So 5 years is a good round number to figure that it's time to plan to refresh hardware. You're also going to find that things have changed in 5 years, and you may need bigger machines or different machines or, whatever. Step three, don't force your people to work on old, slow, nasty computer equipment. They're going to hate you for it. Just don't do it. Change your attitude about equipment. And by changing your attitude, here's what I mean, is try to think of it in terms of a necessary expense or necessary evil. Understand that good equipment is an enabler for great employees. It really is. If people have good equipment in front of them and they're happy and they want to do a good job, they're going to be better off with good equipment that helps them get their job done on a given day. Good gear makes for happier employees, because you're putting a lot of workload on their plate these days, and if they're sitting around waiting for slow, sluggish computers, they're getting stressed out because they're not getting their work done in a day, and they're angry, they're frustrated, and you may lose them to somebody who's got a little different attitude about infrastructure. And finally, remember that responsive systems keep your customers happy as well. If you've got a line of customers standing at your checkout counter 20 people deep, they're as frustrated as your cashiers are. So it's important to think of this stuff as enabling your business, not just an expense in your business. And just understand that the better the gear is, the better the infrastructure is running, the happier everyone is. The happier your employees are, and happier employees make happier customers,
and that's a win-win for everybody. So that's it for today. I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up. It looks like we've got a few questions, but in the interest of time, we're going to go ahead and wrap this up and answer those questions offline. We'll get back to those of you who posted questions directly. I also just want to mention that we do have a series of these webinars planned where we're going to take some of these topics that we've gone through and a couple of other topics and do a deeper dive into them. So I would suggest that you just keep an eye peeled for those as we get those scheduled in the next couple of weeks. We're going to keep doing these and start to drill down a little bit deeper and give you some real stuff you can work with. So once again, I just want to thank you for your time today. I hope this has been beneficial to you, and hope to see you in another webinar forward in the future. Thanks a lot, and we'll see you later.